Hey guys, and welcome back to Monko, where stuff ensues, but a couple of days ago I beat a video game, and so I kind of want to talk about it because that is thematically what the channel is. But on Wednesday I beat Slime Rancher, specifically the version that came out on the Nintendo Switch. The game is published and developed by Monomi Park. It originally came out on PC via Steam in 2016 via Early Access. Later in 2017 it came out on the Xbox One, and then 2018 came out on the PS4, and then eventually in 2021 it came to the Nintendo Switch. But the game took me a total of 15 hours to beat, as in to get to the end of the game and get the credits roll. Your mileage may vary very much on this game in particular, since it's a farming slash ranching game. It took me 15 hours, but it might take someone else like 30 hours or 25 hours to get to the end. Just because it's a ranching slash farming game, it might take you a lot longer to get to the end. I spent a decent amount of time ranching, but I also spent a decent amount of time exploring, and so eventually I got to the end. And in that 15 hours, I felt like I saw a majority of the content that I had to see. But like I said, since it's a farming slash ranching style of game, your mileage may very well vary on how long it takes you to get to the end. But overall, my opinion on Slime Rancher is, I saw it back in the day in early access. I thought it was an interesting game that I might eventually look into, and it took me about 5 years to get there. But overall, I enjoyed the game a decent amount, It's just a lighthearted and fun game, and honestly, if you enjoy something more lighthearted, or if you can enjoy something more lighthearted, I think it's a very good game. It's just relaxing to explore the world and ranch and just, kick back instead of having games that kind of press you and stuff like that. But in terms of the graphics and performance, the graphics are pretty decent, to be honest. They're nothing too crazy. They are more cartoony themed, as it is kind of more of a cartoony, kind of childish game, I would say. But the graphics are pretty nice on the eyes. They're nothing crazy, but like I said, I really don't give a shit about the graphics, so they're fine in my opinion. Now, where this game kind of starts to falter, probably on the Nintendo Switch version, is the performance. Now, the performance for the most part holds up pretty well when you're exploring the world, and when you start out with your ranch at least, the game holds a pretty steady frame rate, probably around 30, sometimes 60, but it's a pretty steady frame rate nonetheless. Now, when your ranch starts to get a bit more crowded with slimes and you have more activity on your ranch, the frame rate can chug quite a bit. And when I say chug, I mean probably around 15 frames per second is where it drops down to. So it's kind of unfortunate the performance doesn't hold up once your ranch starts getting more complex, but nonetheless, that's kind of a hardware limitation probably. I think the processor probably isn't strong enough to withstand what the demands of what Slime Rancher wants, but it's kind of disappointing that it doesn't hold up when you start getting into the late game. But overall, the graphics are pretty cute and enjoyable, and they're nice to look at, but the performance is pretty good as well for the most part. But like I said, once you start getting into the late game, the frame rate starts to get rough. But in terms of the music and voice acting, the music is nothing too crazy, to be honest, but it's decent. It's more background noise, to be honest. It's lighthearted and cheerful and enjoyable, but nonetheless, it's not really all that memorable. I would say the two songs that really stood out to me were probably the Ruin song and then the Desert song. Other than that, though, I really can't remember much of the soundtrack because it was kind of background noise, but it was nonetheless, it complemented the game pretty well. But in terms of voice acting, there is none, because the main character does not have a voice actor, and as well, since most of the story is told through notes and emails, there really is no voice acting for that. The closest you get to voice acting are the slimes, which have their cute little, sounds that they make, and that's pretty decent, to be honest. All the slimes kind of have the cute little sounds they make, and it's, like I said, cute. I guess that's done pretty well. I don't know how you would define that on a spectrum of being like done well, but I mean, the slimes were what they were. They sounded cute, and that's all good, but that's about as close as you'll get to voice acting in this game. But in terms of the music and voice acting, the music is pretty decent. There are a couple that sounded a lot better than the others, but mostly it's just background noise, and it does its part. And of course, there's no voice acting, but the slimes sound, I guess, authentic, and it's pretty cute as well. But in terms of the story and characters, there isn't a hell of a lot of story to be here in this game, to be honest. You play as a character known as Beatrix LeBeau, who leaves Earth to set out to a distant planet to start a slime ranch. Now, that's pretty much the long and the short of the story. Kind of what expands on the story are emails and notes. The notes left by a character named H, who kind of tells his story on the far, far range, and as well, the emails you get from characters, mainly your love interest known as Casey, kind of tells another story as well. Like I said, the game does have an ending, like a definitive ending, I guess you could say, and there is a credit roll after that ending, but the story isn't too crazy, to be honest. It's pretty light, but considering the type of game that this is, I wouldn't have wanted a heavy story anyway, so I can appreciate the fact that the story is done light, and it really doesn't bother me. But in that sense as well, the characters aren't really anything too crazy. The main character, Beatrix, really doesn't have a character, and she never really speaks either. You don't really know what her character is, because like I said, you don't really get her personified all that much. Through her emails with Casey, you somewhat get a personification of what she's kind of like, but that's never really truly realized throughout the game. As well, the other two characters, Casey and H, only really get their characterization through notes. Otherwise, the characters are pretty light as well. But like I said, for a game like this, I wouldn't really want a heavy story or characters. I just kind of want to, you know, just enjoy the experience. And since it's a light experience, I can't really complain about the fact that the characters are kind of non-existent because it's not really what the game is trying to go for. But in terms of the story and characters, both are pretty light. That's preferable because honestly, I wouldn't have preferred them to be heavy. But in terms of the gameplay is mainly split up into two segments: exploring the world and then maintaining your ranch slash farm. Now, the ranching farming part of the game is pretty enjoyable. I think it's the one that I spent less time on since I'm more of an exploration type of focus guy. I enjoyed exploring the world more, but I did spend time ranching and farming as well. Mainly what you'll be doing is you'll be building coops and gardens as well to contain the slimes that you catch out in the open world. And then with the gardens, you'll grow the food that you'll supply the slimes with to feed them to gain something called plorts. Now, plorts are mainly used for currency that you can use to pretty much buy stuff to upgrade your ranch. But this part is pretty enjoyable, to be honest. It can be kind of addicting when you start to get deeper into the game because, of course, you can get expansions to your ranch to get more room, to add more slimes, add more gardens. As well, you can add stuff like storage areas and as well as coops for catching chickens, because some of the slimes have different requirements for the food they need. Some of them need fruits, some of them need veggies, and some of them eat meat. And the main way of feeding them meat is by feeding them chickens. Now, when I personally started to set up the ranch, I just kind of took every slime that I found and put them in the ranch. When that started to get too complex to manage, I started to take away the meat-eating slimes. I just went for fruit and veggie-eating ones to kind of streamline my ranch. But it's very much your mileage may vary about how you want to run your ranch. I found it easier for me personally to run it with just fruit and veggies, but like I said, you could just have a pure meat eating and just go with a lot of chickens. But like I said, that's very much your mileage may vary. Of course, there's upgrades that come along with the garden and the coops and everything like that. You can add an auto feeder to more automate it, and you can also auto collect the plorts as well to kind of, like I said, automate the experience a bit more. As well, the more slimes you get in one coop, you might want to raise the walls or add a ceiling to make sure that they can't escape. But as well, in that sense, you can get more storage and stuff like that. And as well, like I said, you can get chicken coops. You can also add a few other things, but they're kind of more minor compared to that. But like I said, the ranching part is very much your mileage may vary. I found it very enjoyable. It can get a lot deeper than I got in it. I was pretty uncreative. I kept all my slimes separated and kind of kept them in their separate areas. I grew specific foods for specific slimes. Like I said, you can get a lot deeper into it. You can kind of crossbreed the slimes to make slimes that are bigger but also inhabit the characteristics of two different types of slimes. You also gain access to a laboratory later in the game that you can use the plorts to kind of research different technology, which can further make your ranch more complex. And as well, as far as I know, you can also make it even more automated than before and make it a lot easier to farm in that sense. But I never really got into the laboratory part, so I can't really speak on it. Like I said, I spent a lot more time exploring than I did ranching, and in that sense, I kept my ranch pretty simple. But you can get pretty deep into the ranching part. Like I said, that's very much where the time part comes into it. Your mileage may vary because you can get pretty deep into it. But as well, you can buy upgrades on your ranch to upgrade your health, upgrade your stamina, and give you a jetpack, and get some pretty decent upgrades for exploring the open world. But the ranching part of this game is pretty enjoyable. It wasn't what I spent the most time in because I enjoy exploring more than I do ranching, but it was pretty enjoyable nonetheless. Now, the other half of this game is exploration, and that's the part of the game that I enjoyed more or less because I'm more of an exploration-oriented guy than I am a ranching or farming type of guy. But the open world is pretty fun to explore, to be honest. Now, in the open world, you'll be collecting resources and collecting different types of slimes. Mainly, there's 4 different regions to the open world exploration area. There's kind of more of a canyon area that also has a kind of hilly volcano area to it. As well, you have more of a forest area, and then you kind of have a ruins area, and the final area is more of a desert area. But exploring the open world is pretty fun, to be honest. There's a lot of nooks and crannies, and as well as a lot of fun to kind of go out and collect resources in the early game, and as well, you'll be collecting slimes in the open world. Now, it's pretty cool, to be honest, because different parts of the open world have different types of slimes. Obviously, there's different biomes in the area, and so every different biome has its different sorts of fruits, veggies, etc., and as well has its different slimes that you can find as well. And the slimes are pretty cool because all of them have different needs and wants, and all of them have their kind of quirks to ranching them as well. But I enjoy exploring the open world. There's a lot of diversity to the open world, and it's really fun just to kind of explore every nook and cranny and just kind of vibe in the open world. That being said, with all the biomes, I feel like they could have gone with some different biomes as well, but I think they'll probably remedy that in Slime Rancher 2, probably give you more of a snowy area area, and probably as well give you more of a jungle area as well. I think there's a lot of improvements that they'll probably be able to make in the second game, but the first game is good nonetheless as well in that sense. But I enjoyed exploring the open world. That was mainly what I spent most of the time doing, because more or less that's more of my personality more than anything. I like to explore them more than I do like to farm, and so that's what I was doing a majority of the time. But other than that, the only things I can really complain about this game is the fact that your storage slots are limited to 4. I don't know if you can ever upgrade that, but I never found a point where I could hold more than 4 items. Now you can upgrade your stack and how many items you can hold in a stack, but you can only hold 4 different types of items in your inventory. I think maybe they'll expand that in the second game, or maybe even in the first game you can expand it really late game, but I never found myself being able to expand that, and so that kind of annoyed me. As well, a complaint that I imagine some people will have, but I really didn't give a shit about, is the fact that the game doesn't have co-op to it. This seems kind of like a perfect co-op game, but it does not have any co-op to it, so that's kind of disappointing. Not disappointing for me personally, because I'm not big into co-op, and I wasn't going to play this in co-op anyways, but I imagine that's something that as well in Slime Rancher 2, which is currently in early access on Steam, that they'll probably correct that in that game. But overall, the gameplay is pretty enjoyable. I think people will find varying degrees of enjoyment out of it depending on what their personalities are. If you're more of a farming type of person, you'll probably really enjoy the farming aspect, but you're not crazy on exploration, maybe you'll like that part less. Maybe if you're more of a 50-50 type of person, or even if you really like both, you might find a lot more enjoyment out of this game than other people. For me personally, I found a lot of enjoyment out of exploration, but I'm not crazy on farming, but I enjoyed the exploration part a lot. And even though I don't really get crazy into farming, it did still suck me in. I was thinking, like, even when I wasn't playing the game, I was thinking about how I was going to manage and maintain my ranch. So it does have kind of an addiction to it. The game nonetheless and overall is pretty enjoyable, and I had a lot of fun with it with the time that I spent with it. And honestly, it's a pretty stress-free experience, and so that's pretty enjoyable as well. Just to be able to kick back and kind of start a ranch and just explore a world instead of having some sort of stressor over your head is pretty enjoyable, and it's appreciable as well because it allows you to kick back and relax in an era where some games are pretty stressful, to be honest. But overall, my opinion on Slime Rancher is that it's a pretty enjoyable and stress-free game that you can just kick back and relax to be honest. I don't know if it'll be everyone's cup of tea, but I think most people will be able to find enjoyment out of it. It's very much cutesy, and as well, yes, they do have plushies if you just want a plushie for it. They do have them. And as well, like I said, the game took me only 15 hours, but your mileage may vary because it can take you a lot longer if you put a lot more investment into your ranch. But I enjoyed exploring the open world. I found some enjoyment in the ranching as well. But like I said, your mileage may vary just depending on what type of games you like. But thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.